Hi guys, this is Wayne and I'm back for another episode of the online tutorials. On this episode we're going to be discussing audio podcasting and how you can still record an audio podcast from home. So this episode is really designed at the guys that are already recording podcasts, going to studios, that have the setup, but at the moment you're at home, you can't get out and you still need to record an episode. I'm going to show you some online applications, some websites, some apps. It's all free and you can do this yourself from home. Hopefully by the end of this you should be able to record an audio podcast and upload and stream to Mixcloud, TuneIn, Spotify. Let's go. I like to use a website called Podomatic. So you can go to podomatic.com and register an account. For now, for the basic purposes, we're going to use the free account. If you develop and want to use more, then there's an option to do that. So once I'm into Podomatic, this is the first page you see. What I'm going to ask you to do now is go to Post New. Now you can do a new podcast, a quick post, or recording booth. So as I'm going to choose to do an audio podcast today, I'm going to click recording booth. So with recording booth, it brings up some good guideline help tools to help you set up if you're doing it for the first time. It's going to show you some quick tutorials and give you all the help you need. So it's going to go through a little check just to make sure that our sound will sound really good. So if we follow the instructions as it goes, and now we're ready to start. So before we can do the podcast, it's going to check our sound level. So let's start the test. I'm using a handheld microphone in my studio, but if you didn't have a handheld microphone, your option would be to use the internal microphone on your device or computer. This actually works on your mobile phone as well, so I'm going to talk a bit more about that later on. But for the purpose of this video, I'm using my audio interface and my handheld mic. Now if you read what was on the screen, it said to be quiet while it checks the environment. So that was checking to make sure there's no background noise. If you're recording an audio podcast, you want it to be as best sound quality as possible. So that means making sure that the room doesn't have a lot of background noises and stuff. That test was done. And let's start recording. It's going to give me the record button, which I press here, and the countdown, and I'll begin. So good afternoon and welcome to my brand new podcast episode. On this episode I'm going to be discussing how to create a podcast. Now I'm going to mention this as well. For the purposes of this tutorial, this recording is going to be very short. I'm very mindful that I don't want this tutorial video to be too long. So I'm not going to speak for half hour on how to do this. I'm going to end my recording now. That's finished. Let's assume that this was a 20-minute long audio. I would have saved that. Now it will give me the option to publish. So I'm going to publish the recording. And it's going to upload that recording. I'm going to put in my description and I'm going to give it a name. In the description, I've just put a simple description, but the better description, as you can imagine, the better the response you'll have. The next tab is audio. And as you can see, it's got the audio recording that I just done. The next one is photo. Now, it's always good to have good artwork, good images associated with your podcast episode. Now where do you get those from? Now I'm not a graphic designer, but what I found out, there's a website called canva.com which is free and easy to use. You just register an account on canva.com and I'm going to go to it right now. So I've got a Canva account and there are loads of great templates and ideas that you can create your own imagery. So there's mine. It's just my podcast. So I've created that free in about 5 minutes on Canva. I saved that as a JPEG image and I'm now going to upload that to my podcast. So I'm going to upload a photo. I'm going to browse. So it's now taken that photo. I'm going to do save and continue. Here we go. And that's the audio podcast image there. I'm going to hit the next tab, which is tags. It's really good to put tags in your podcast, and that helps people find it by typing in keywords. This podcast is clean as well. It's not explicit. So I'm going to hit the clean tab and I'm going to hit continue. So this is the review page. So I'm going to review everything that I've done. And I'm going to do save and continue. Your episode is now being published. It takes a few minutes for it to go live, but once it's gone live, it will be available for all to download and listen back. Now I'm going to mention a few things here at the bottom of this screen. If you could see here, it's got Go Pro. So when you go Pro, that's upgrading your account and upgrading the capacity of what you can do on podcast. As I say, it takes a few minutes, and you can click on this button here to see where it is in the process. There you go, success. So my podcast episode is now live. So now the world can listen to that. So here's the link. If I click on this link here, that's my podcast. So I can press play and listen back to it. Welcome, good afternoon, and this is Wayne's podcast episode. There you go, that's all you need to hear on that. Now on this screen, you can already see, if you're on iTunes or Apple Music, you can actually subscribe to this podcast. You can download the podcast and you can share the podcast. There's real simple tutorials on how you can get your audio podcast to stream to iTunes, Spotify, and other podcatchers. But really now, that's all you have to do. This podcast is now available for you to send around to your friends, family. The last thing I'm going to show you, on the Manage tab, you have the Settings button. If you go into Settings, on the podcast settings, this is where you can type in a bit of information about your podcast. The Directories tab here is a really interesting one. If you look at this directory, you can distribute your audio podcast to Apple Podcast. If you click and read the instructions on how to submit, you could also add your podcast to Google, follow their instructions. You can hit that button there and submit your podcast to Spotify, Deezer and Podcorn. Now I mentioned earlier, you can do all of this using the mobile phone app. So once you download the app off the app stores, follow the simple, really easy to follow instructions, record your audio and publish just the same. I really do hope you've found this podcast tutorial very useful and interesting. Please comment and let me know if there's anything else you need help on how to record a podcast. Take care of yourselves. Bye.